I was asked by a subscriber to my channel if I could identify five or more books, in other words, a small number of books that I have found most meaningful in my spiritual life, and the ones maybe that I go back to over and over again over the course of time as I want to refresh myself in terms of the things that I've learned over the course of time. I told him that, I am by no means an expert, or as he tried to compliment me, being well versed, quote unquote, in all schools of Buddhism. But in any case, I have poked my nose into quite a few books, and I told him I would give this challenge a try, this request that he made, this favor that he asked of me. So, what I thought I would do is actually go back to the time of my original spiritual awakening in 1979, which, as you know, if you've listened to some of my other videos, was outside the context of any particular religion or spiritual sort of concept system, if you will. And at that time, having had the desire, the strong desire to understand the peace of mind that sort of suddenly came upon me, I poked around and looked into various traditions. And one of the books that I found that actually described a lot of the traditions, and particularly the mystical aspects of those traditions, was the book by Aldous Huxley called The Perennial Philosophy. This is really a pretty amazing book that, to me, reflects the fact that the basic spiritual experience that we can talk about in terms of the inner experience is one that is common to at least some followers of all the various mainstream religious traditions. And yet, at the same time, what Huxley did was through his anthology, which is basically what this book is, he gives quotes from the different traditions that helped, frankly, to lead me to realize that Buddhism was a tradition that I wanted to really focus in on in more depth and to study. So what I'm going to do in this video, and I may only cover one or perhaps two books in this particular video, is to give a little bit of information about this book from the cover of the book, and from also perhaps from Amazon in their description of the book, as well as then perhaps two or three or four reviews by users, people, customers who had read the book and described their review of it on Amazon. I also want to give a glimpse into the table of contents into each of the books that I cover. And so since my friend Leon asked me not only to identify the books, but to share a few comments, I feel like, okay, I've given you a few comments on the Huxley book, so let's get into how the book is described and what is in it in terms of its contents. The Perennial Philosophy is defined by its author as, quote, the metaphysic that recognizes a divine reality substantial to the world of things and lives and minds, close quote. With great wit and stunning intellect, Aldous Huxley examines the spiritual beliefs of various religious traditions and explains them in terms that are personally meaningful. The New York Times said of this book, quote, it is important to say that even an agnostic can read this book with joy. It is the masterpiece of all anthologies. As Mr. Huxley has proven before, he can find and frame rare beauty in literature. And here, long before Freud, writers are quoted who combine beauty with proud psychology, close quote. The New Yorker wrote, quote, Mr. Huxley writes as well as ever, occasionally with brilliance and wit, but now and then, in his absorption and otherworldliness, he soars clean out of sight. Here's the table of contents of Perennial Philosophy. So after the introduction, he has a chapter on That Art Thou. Then going from there, the nature of the ground, personality, sanctity, divine incarnation, God in the world, charity, mortification, non-attachment, right livelihood, truth, religion and temperament, self-knowledge, grace and free will, good and evil, time and eternity, salvation, deliverance, enlightenment, immortality and survival, silence, prayer, suffering, faith, God is not mocked, tantum religio potuit suadere malorum, idolatry, emotionalism, the miraculous, ritual, symbol, sacrament, spiritual exercises, perseverance and regularity, and finally contemplation, action, and social utility. In terms of some reviews by people who had read the book, as posted on Amazon, one person describes it as a life-changing, beautifully written book and says, Aldous Huxley takes on spirituality and the base of all religions as seen through the eyes of saints and spiritual leaders. It's a life-changing, beautifully written book. Aldous Huxley is one of the greatest minds of our time. This was my first spiritual book outside the Bible, so it was kind of a perennial philosophy crash course for me. Some words are difficult to understand, so it's better to have a background in other religions to fully understand it. Another reviewer, who entitles his piece, quote, a masterpiece that anyone interested in a sincere divine search should read it, says, this book is nothing short of a masterpiece, not only because its content is brilliant, but because Huxley put it together with such brightness that only a genius mind could do it. The Perennial Philosophy is a manual for anyone interested in Eastern philosophical and religious thought. It goes deep inside the heart and teachings of the most influential mystics that ever lived. This book is practical, clear, and detailed, covering important subjects that would take many students years to collect from several different sources. Huxley proves brilliantly the unity, truth, and wisdom beyond most religions. They all share a common source and ground that passes from faith, repentance, and death to self into a divine nature of pure love and joy. Another reviewer, who entitles his review, Thou Art That, says, this is a book that I think I will be referencing back to for the rest of my life. If you basically want to understand the entire perspective of a Western thinker on the commonalities of Eastern religion and mysticism, as well as Christian mystic thought, this is the book. Think of it as the complete tutorial on what people, quote, think they're saying when they utter the cliche, quote, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Now, if a person were truly that, and very intelligent as well, then this book explains how they might think about God, self, universe, time, etc. Yeah, you name it. Everything you've stuffed in a closet in the back of your mind and called it religion is presented here from the mystic point of view and collected wisdom of multiple, quote, religions. This might properly be called, at least I will, the set of ultimate goals for the self, or perhaps the selfless perfection of the realization of the divine in the individual and the purpose of all human consciousness. I'm not used to speaking this way. It will take some time to get through all of the material in this course of study, but I can feel it working on me. And a final review entitled A Spiritual Philosophy, a reviewer says, this is a book that reveals the basic development of spirituality without regard to religions. It could be thought of as the backbone of religions without the limitations. It is a scholarly work, but could be of interest to anyone seeking a higher way. And without reading the next review, I'll just say that the next one is entitled, quote, Discover the Universality of Human Values and Philosophy. So, with those reviews, being consistent with my own positive impressions of the book, I have given copies of this book several times to people that I've cared about over the years as something to chew on as far as thinking about and reflecting upon and trying to understand the experience of spirituality in this human existence. And so certainly in terms of a sort of a primer prior to diving into Buddhism, this, I think, is a book that has many merits. But now, what I'll do is I'll get into the books within the Buddhist tradition that I've found to be useful. And the way I'll do that is, frankly, in a relatively sort of chronological way in terms of the chronological arc of Buddhism itself. So that first off, I want to start by describing a book that I think is an excellent one for anyone wanting to sort of in one volume have an orthodox, accurate, clearly described sense of Theravadan Buddhism, or the earlier form of Buddhism based on the historical Buddha. And for that purpose, we will look at Walpola Rahula's book called What the Buddha Taught. And to just review what is said on the back of that book to describe the book, and also to take a look at the table of contents, let me provide the following. From the back of What the Buddha Taught: this indispensable volume is a lucid and faithful account of the Buddha's teachings. Quote, "For years," says the Journal of the Buddhist Society, "the newcomer to Buddhism has lacked a simple and reliable introduction to the complexities of the subject. Dr. Rahula's What the Buddha Taught fills the need as only could be done by one having a firm grasp of the vast material to be sifted. It is a model of what a book should be that is addressed first of all to the educated and intelligent reader. Authoritative and clear, logical and sober, this study is as comprehensive as it is masterly." Close quote. The contents of What the Buddha Taught are: Chapter 1, the Buddhist attitude of mind. 2, when he gets into the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth, dukkha. 3, the second noble truth, the arising of dukkha. 4, the third noble truth, or the cessation of dukkha. And Chapter 5, the fourth noble truth, or the path. Then in Chapter 6, he covers the doctrine of no soul, and in Chapter 7, meditation or mental culture. He finishes in Chapter 8 with What the Buddha Taught and the World Today. This again is a book that I've recommended to many people. I haven't given away as many copies just because, again, I evolved fairly quickly into the Mahayana tradition. But I want to read just a few reviews from Amazon of people that have read and commented themselves on this wonderful book, which, by the way, again, if you want an excellent description of the Four Noble Truths, the skandhas, the five skandhas, this is the book in a small volume. Now there's lots and lots written, and including the whole Pali Canon, which is multiple volumes. But again, if somebody wants to tackle the basics in one volume on an authoritative basis, this Rahula book is an excellent one. So here are some of the reviews from Amazon. This first reviewer entitles his review, quote, "Best of 4 introductory Buddhist books I've read," close quote. And he goes on to say, "With no prior Buddhist experience, I have been looking for a comprehensive overview of the philosophy. I tried several other books. One was too full of ceremonies and references to teachers and deities. Another one was a good Western intro, but it was unclear where Buddha stopped and author started. Third one was distracting from the content by constant references to the author's bio. And then I finally found What the Buddha Taught, and here's what I love about it. Writing is targeted to well-educated intellectual reader. It's not overly simplistic, and thoughts are concise and pointed. Half the book is Western explanation, and half are actually suttas that Buddha spoke, so you get author's interpretation of the concept and then compare it with the source. He said, I highly recommend this book for anyone wanting to discover Buddhism." A second reviewer entitles his review, quote, "Reap the intellectual rewards of Buddha without converting," close quote. He says, "If you want a straightforward explanation of Buddhism and Buddhist principles without an author's opinion of the application of these principles or meandering, quote, interpretations, then this is the book for you. The author does a wonderful job describing the fundamental principles of Buddhism based on well-referenced facts along with the most accepted interpretations of the various teachings. I enjoy learning about the positive facets of various religions, especially those teachings that are universally applicable, and this book fits that bill. Unlike some books on religion, where a lot of time is spent pointing out flaws with various beliefs, this book seems to take an almost scientific approach that leaves the question as to the validity of the, quote, religion as the one true, quote, path up to the reader. One takeaway from this book for me was the idea that Buddhism could very well be labeled a way or view of life versus a religion. Maybe one day in the future we will have Christian Buddhists, Muslim Buddhists, and even Jewish Buddhists. Although the great modern religions of the Middle East have all derived from the early monotheistic viewpoints going back to Abraham and Moses, the divide between these may take millennia to overcome, whereas Buddhism does not necessarily or directly conflict with these religions' fundamental principles. The next reviewer entitles his review, quote, "The best book on authentic Buddhist teachings I ever read, not for those who are looking for fairy tales, very deep and complex," close quote. He or she says, "The best book for anyone who is looking for authentic Theravada Buddhist teachings. I have been sickened by reading books written by half-educated or misunderstood people in this subject. This was written by a highly regarded and educated Buddhist monk from Sri Lanka. It's a high concentration of pure Buddhist teachings, not for superficial readers. This is for the intelligent reader who can understand deep Buddhist analysis of mind and existential truths." And then finally, a reviewer describes his review as, quote, "straightforward introduction," close quote, says, "This book is a solid and straightforward overview of the basic philosophic tenets of Buddhism. The text itself is relatively short, less than 100 pages, but it is not simplistic. Rahula explains the main points and directs the reader to the sources for these ideas. For the most part, it doesn't get into more esoteric details or points of dispute between different branches of Buddhism. He does indicate a few points of disagreement over interpretations, but leaves that more for the reader to go explore on his own. Rahula explains the ways that Buddhist ideas have been misinterpreted or misunderstood by Western thinkers, and he tries to correct those errors. The latter half of the book contains translations of original sources for those interested. This is definitely a good starting place for people interested in Buddhist ideas." Well, I'm going to leave it at that for this particular video. And again, as my friend Leon asked for me to identify 5, I actually did identify 3 others that involve texts or scriptures. One will be the Diamond Sutra, and for that I will be speaking about the book called Chan and Zen Teaching by Charles Luck, or translations by Charles Luck. Second, my beloved Threefold Lotus Sutra, and I'll be talking about the Weatherhill Kosai edition of that particular text. And then finally, Tanisho, which is a translation by Dennis Hirota of the famous Shin Buddhist text that describes in very succinct and moving terms the essential philosophy and beliefs of the founder of Shin Buddhism, namely Shinran Shonin, as described by one of his disciples. So there are many, many books, and how to identify 5 is a challenge. But as a bonus, so to speak, I'm going to throw in a 6th, which is not a text per se, but it's called Pure Land Buddhist Painting, and it's part of the Japanese Arts Library. And the reason I add that is because for me, as I evolved in my understanding and appreciation of the Buddhist tradition, as is said in the Zen kind of approach, the truth is beyond words and concepts. So, we need in some ways to go beyond the texts. And of course, within Shin Buddhism, we go to the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, in Chinese calligraphy on a scroll. But in addition, I really have come to love Asian art and gain much gratification and pleasure from viewing the kinds of things that are representative of the concepts and truths that that are the best we can do in describing truth or reality, given the fact that no concepts or ideas that we come up with in our dualistic thinking mind really can pin that down definitively. Again, the truth is beyond all words, beyond all concepts. And so we're left with needing to, have a finger pointing at the moon and not mistake these texts for the moon itself. I hope this is interesting and helpful. There will be 2 or 3 more videos like this to get into those other volumes. Take care.